Hi, this is the first time I've written to a podcast. Damn, it's actually the first time I've even talked about this story. I'll start by apologizing in case my writing seems a bit odd, but my English isn't exactly top-notch. My name is Matt. The story I'm about to tell is more of a small collection of a couple of my encounters in the Alps here in Italy. Until now, I've always been hesitant to actually tell this story, partly because every time I've done so, I've gotten skeptical looks. But after watching a few episodes on the channel, I hope someone here can help me make sense of it. I'll start by explaining exactly where in the Alps it all began. My grandmother owned a house in a small village in Val Grande here in Italy, and I spent my entire childhood going on vacation there. The village itself is so small that calling it a village would be a compliment. Many houses have been uninhabited since the 90s, but we liked it that way. It was a quiet and secluded place. Of course, we had access to practically nothing, and we had to generate our own power with a small generator. Whenever I complained about the sudden power outages, my grandmother would always say, "Don't worry, Matt. This is just a better chance to enjoy a nice evening outside." She'd immediately pack a small backpack and a blanket and take me out to the lawn to look at the stars. Thinking about it, I really miss that time. One thing that always struck me as odd was that despite all the summers I spent there, my grandmother forbade me from going into the woods, even though many of the trails were officially marked. Listen, Matt, nature is a beautiful place and it lets us enjoy it, so let's not disturb it. Since I know many people who follow these stories are used to tales of vast American or Canadian forests, I feel compelled to briefly describe the woods in that part of the Alps. They aren't overly large. There are wide open areas at high altitude and small patches where the vegetation is very dense, though they don't last long. This will become important later. The first incident took place around the summer of 2018. My grandmother had passed away a few years earlier, and I had inherited the house. Having just turned 18, I was eager to gain some experience living on my own, so I left at the start of the summer break. That summer was particularly busy throughout the valley. I think it was the 25th anniversary of the national park or something like that. Fortunately, the area where my house stood wasn't visited by tourists at all. Occasionally, I'd come across a couple who had clearly taken a wrong turn, or a hiker, or a small family. The first week went perfectly until I made my first mistake. Call it the urge to break the rules, or just the foolishness of a young boy, but that summer, I brought a tent. I wanted to climb the mountain, find a good spot, and set up camp. I'm not, and certainly wasn't back then, an experienced outdoorsman, but I wasn't planning anything difficult. Once I'd set up camp, definitely illegally, but carefully without damaging anything, I relaxed and ate a couple of sausages roasted over the fire. Then I thought I saw movement among the trees. You know those small patches of dense woods I described earlier? Well, someone thought camping there was cooler than in a clearing. In Italy, we don't have many large predators, just the occasional wolf and maybe a bear. In all the years I'd been there, I'd only seen either of them a handful of times. I immediately pointed my flashlight toward the trees, scanning the area. The biggest thing I had was a small knife I used for carving wooden stakes. It's not easy to get a firearm permit here, but holding that little knife at that moment gave me a strange confidence, as if I could actually do something. The sounds continued for 10 minutes all around me. They were always just out of sight. The strangest part was a constant dragging noise, as if whatever was moving was pulling something heavy behind it. "Is anyone there? This isn't funny," I shouted. By then I was convinced it wasn't an animal, but someone with a very dark sense of humor. That's when I saw it. One eye. Huge, reflecting the beam of my flashlight. I took a step back as it advanced. It was dark, so I couldn't be sure, but it looked at least 2 or 3 meters tall. This is where I'd like to say I acted bravely. I didn't. I was paralyzed. After what felt like the longest 10 seconds of my life, it got close enough to be vaguely visible in the dying firelight. It was long, its body covered in what looked like a mix of scales and fur, but what shocked me most was its head and paws, which resembled those of a large cat or tiger. That's when my legs finally moved. I ran blindly down the slope, slipping several times. As I ran, I felt it brushing behind me, getting closer. When I finally reached the path, I ran all the way home. I collapsed on the porch and threw up. The next day, I returned to retrieve my things. I saw tracks. Something big had been there. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined everything, that it was just a lynx. But those tracks told me otherwise. That was the last time I went into the woods. Years passed. By 2021, I had almost forgotten. That summer, my girlfriend, I'll call her Anna, and my friend Jacob came to stay. Everything went well until they suggested camping. I agreed, even though I was anxious. We set up camp in a clearing. Later that evening, Anna went looking for cell service. Suddenly, she screamed. We found her crying, nose bleeding slightly. She kept repeating, "There's something in the woods, Matt. Something strange, something wrong." We packed immediately. As we were leaving, we all saw a large shape at the edge of the bushes. Then came a sound, like a growl mixed with a long hiss, as if whatever made it didn't have enough air. We left as fast as we could. The next day, we went home. That winter, I sold the house. I don't know what we saw, but one thing I'm sure of, it didn't want people in those mountains. The night didn't start with fear. It started the way most nights do, when nothing feels wrong yet, when the air is quiet enough to fool you into thinking it will stay that way. But sometimes there are moments that don't belong to the rest of your life. Moments that feel like something noticed you first and decided to follow. These incidents have been happening for around 12 years now, but last night was terrifying enough to make me act. For full context, we have to go back to the summer of 2013. I was 6 years old when I went to summer camp for the first time with Cub Scouts. It was late at night, and I woke up needing to use the bathroom. I completely ignored the buddy system. Since we were in the woods, the bathroom was just a latrine about 200 feet away from the site where my pack was set up. I unzipped the door of the two-person tent that I had to myself and stepped outside. It was dark, pitch black, save for the sparse moonlight that reached the ground through the tree canopy. As I made my way, I could have sworn I heard something behind me, but I didn't see anything. I thought it was a deer, or some other animal common in the Appalachians. Then I saw it. Off about 30 feet to my left stood a pale, tall thing. I couldn't make out any facial features in the dim light except for its eyes. Wrong, too far apart, too small, with no sclera. Just black voids that seemed to pierce right through me. It ran away, and I never saw it again. Back in May of last year, I woke up to the sound of tapping on my window. When I looked outside, I saw nothing, and I know this for sure because the street I live on is very well lit. I got back into bed, and a few minutes later, I heard my mom calling out. Not directly to me, just calling out. The thing is, she was at work, a 20-minute drive from my house. That was the first time I felt true fear because I had recently learned about skinwalkers. I panicked, ran to my parents' room, and fell asleep there. That was the last of it, or at least that's what I told myself to calm down. But then there was last night. I was home alone because my parents had to attend an event for work. I was lying in bed reading a comic when I heard something moving outside my window. I looked outside. This was my first mistake. It moved around to the back of the house and I followed it. I don't know why. I guess I was curious and didn't have much else to do. It stopped about 20 feet from the kitchen window. I parted a small gap in the blinds and saw it. This weird dog-like thing. It had the same void eyes. I gasped, and it heard me. It looked at me. I should have reacted faster because when I finally turned to run, it had already scrambled onto my porch. I heard it trying to open the back door, fiddling with the doorknob. I ran upstairs to my parents' room and grabbed the Remington SP-10 that my dad kept in case someone ever broke in, with 18 shells beside the 3 already loaded into it. Then I ran up into the attic. The attic was accessed similarly to a basement in terms of the entrance. Then I heard glass break. The thing had broken down the door. I was terrified. I thought I was going to die. I heard it moving on all fours. First, it was in the living room. I assumed that when it found nothing, it moved up to the second floor. Then the attic door broke. No let up, no warning. It moved slowly, terrifyingly slow. Like it knew I was there and knew I was scared. It felt like it was toying with me. Every 15, maybe 20 seconds step, I heard it inch closer. 5 minutes passed and I had completely lost track of how far it was, blinded by fear. Then I saw its head, then its neck, arms, and torso. It was facing me, standing on its back legs. Its arms were longer than its legs, and it was horribly thin, like it hadn't eaten in weeks. It just stood there, staring at me like a predator watching prey that couldn't escape. I aimed, and I shot it 3 times. It staggered back slightly, and I reloaded as fast as I possibly could. Another 3 slugs hit its center mass. I kept firing until I had no ammunition left. It was dead. Fully dead, after 23 slugs. I'm not sure any of them missed, based on the fact that the only damage was to its body. I sat there crying for hours. I didn't know what to do, so I eventually went downstairs to the 2nd floor. All the doors were open. Everything. Cabinets, dressers, beds, everything was thrown around. It had been searching. Eventually I called my parents, then the police. The police arrived and I answered the door and let them in. They were as confused as my parents were when they arrived. Then we left. We packed a few suitcases and started driving. I'm writing this from a hotel room in South Carolina, and I hope we stay here for a long time. I like the stories on your channel, and they actually inspired me to share one of my own. This memory is fairly old, so there are a lot of gaps in it, but I'll do my best to tell it the way I remember. I'm also using a fake name in the story. Every year when I was 4 or 5, my whole extended family, aunts, uncles, and more than a dozen cousins, would rent this big, fancy house deep in the woods of New Hampshire. To us kids, it seemed like a mansion. One entire wall of the dining room was made of glass, staring straight out into the dark tree line. Behind the house, a narrow trail marked with garden gnomes led down to a wide river or lake where we usually fished. We were all sitting at the dinner table one evening, on the last night of one of those trips. I was sitting between my closest cousins when I happened to look over at the huge glass wall. That's when I saw them. 3, maybe 4 pairs of yellow eyes, all about the same height, shining from the woods about 100 feet away, perfectly still, perfectly focused on the house, staring at us. The moment I saw them, it felt like something punched me in the stomach. My head went hot, I got dizzy, the room spun, and I thought I was going to throw up. It wasn't fear exactly, it felt more like a presence. Something heavy and evil pressing in from outside, and my body reacted instantly. I said nothing. I just tried to stay upright. After dinner, I was supposed to go fishing with my dad. I was still sick and feverish, but I didn't want to miss it. So we grabbed our rods and walked down the gnome trail toward the water. Something in the woods followed us the entire way. You could hear it pacing us, not crashing around, not curious, but moving step for step like a predator shadowing us from the trees. It stayed with us all the way to the river and all the way back to the house. That night, my fever got really bad, so my parents put me in a bedroom near the front door so they could check on me more easily. I couldn't sleep. I kept drifting in and out, feeling awful, when sometime after midnight I heard footsteps on the porch. More than one. Slow, deliberate, heavy. I turned toward the small window beside the door, and through the glass I saw several wolf-like heads looking in. Their eyes were the same yellow I'd seen in the woods, but they weren't acting like wolves. They were positioned too high, standing too still, and moving in a way that looked coordinated, almost like they were communicating with each other in low murmurs. Then one of them stepped right up to the front door and tried the handle. Another pressed its weight against the wood. Claws scraped down the boards. And then, over all of that, a voice spoke. A human voice. It came from right outside the door, from whatever those things were, and it said, Evan, open the door. It's cold." I froze. I didn't utter a word. They kept trying. The handle rattled. Claws scratched. Footsteps circled around the porch. Soft voices whispered. They stayed there for hours until finally the first light of morning came. When everything went quiet, I finally summoned the courage to step out onto the porch. Deep claw marks scarred the front door. The boards were gouged and shredded, as if something with serious strength had been trying to break in. I never told my parents what really happened. In fact, I didn't tell anyone for years, but my family never rented that house again. And to this day, I still don't know what stood on that porch, whispering my name. Alright guys, the horror ends here for tonight. There will be more terrifying experiences on this channel, so don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Share it with your horror nerd friends. If you've experienced something paranormal, you can email your story to the address in the description. See you in the next video. Stay safe until then, if you can.